Niall Paterson here in the Sky News Daily studio. We do hope this finds you well. Today we're going to be focusing on prisons. Of late they have never been far from the news. In fact, we've seen the new government having to release prisoners early because of overcrowding. To that end, Sky News has been speaking to one serving prison governor who's revealed just how bad things are getting in terms of violence, drugs, overcrowding and much more. Now we will hear from them in just a moment. But I want to introduce you first to Professor Ian Acheson, himself formerly a prison officer and indeed prison governor, author of the book Screwed, Britain's Prison Crisis and How to Escape It. Ian, good to see you. Look, from the title of the book alone, I would suggest that your assessment is that the prison service is literally in crisis right now.
Yes, I did, and I think that's an unescapable conclusion. It's not just me that said that. The government is now saying that, the new government that's inherited 10 years of ruination of a criminal justice law enforcement agency that is now unable to cope. So clearly we are in a crisis. And of course, with a crisis comes opportunity. The title of my book also says, How to Escape That Crisis. And I think we can, with will and leadership and the proper amount of investment, get ourselves out of this hole that we're in at the moment.
Okay, so let's turn then to that conversation carried out by my colleague Molly Malone with a serving prison governor, we should not forget. For obvious reasons, they have decided to remain anonymous, so their words have been voiced by an actor. Let's have a listen.
The number of, the level of incidents, the seriousness of incidents is undoubtedly on the increase. Every day there will be staff who are daunted by what they will be faced with when they unlock. It just heightens frustration, and with that frustration becomes aggression, and with the aggression becomes violence.
Do you see prisoners taking advantage of the situation?
Yes, they do. What we call protesting behaviour has definitely increased. You've got people living there in one set of clothes for, quite a period of time.
2 weeks.
Can be as long as that, sometimes longer. I shouldn't say it really, but there is a smell that you would always associate with prison.
What's that like right now?
In some cases, it's the smell of unwashed bodies. Personal hygiene will always be a trigger for conflict amongst prisoners. We see violence every day. It's as simple as that.
Do you feel that the staff are properly equipped and experienced to be dealing with what faces them?
No, I don't think they are. For a lot of prisoners, the propensity to reach for, to use or to carry weapons, it far exceeds today anything that I've ever known in my experience. That weapon could be absolutely anything from a piece of broken furniture to a kettle full of boiling water, or a weapon fashioned out of a broken razor blade. I've witnessed the aftermath of both staff and prisoners being assaulted, being attacked with all of those things. It's very difficult.
Can you wholeheartedly say that staff are safe when they're going to work?
No, I don't think that we could ever say that everybody is entirely safe. I think, irrespective of what stage of the sentence, there will always be people for who you fear will go on to reoffend. Are we doing the right thing by these individuals? Or are we just setting them up to fail in order to make sure that we've just increased some prison spaces? Because if we've done it to increase prison spaces, then a large proportion of those we've released end up coming back, and then they haven't really achieved anything, have we? It was quite disheartening, really, the attitude of some of those who have been released. There weren't many prisoners that I either spoke to or saw released that were talking about this as a golden opportunity for me to turn my life around. I do worry that we've pushed this through rather quickly. You've also got to factor into this that if some of these people do come back, it may not just be because they breached their licence. It's because they've actually committed further offences. And if they've committed further offences, then a large proportion of those cases, they will be further victims as well. If we're going to be serious about reducing the prison population, I think we need to look at sentencing guidelines for certain offences. And I know that that's been quite topical recently, with one or two cases where we've seen people have gone to prison recently for, let's say, cyber-related offences, for comments on social media and things like that. I think prison needs to be for serious and organised crime, for violent offences.
So there we have one serving prison governor's assessment of exactly how bad things are. I mean, Ian, that smell that he talked about, the stench of the jail, I mean, is that something you recognise?
Well, I think that was a really chilling description of the reality of trying to run one of our jails in 2024.
For those listening to this who have not been in a prison, and it is difficult to generalise across the prison estate, but I wonder if you might try and just explain what it is like, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like when you first get onto the wing.
Well, I think the first thing that hits you, apart from the smell, which is very distinct, and unfortunately has always been unwashed bodies, from time immemorial, is a wall of noise and sound. Now, the difference would be between when I was a prison officer and today. When I went onto the wings, confidently with staff around me that would support me and respond to any problems, prisoners were out all the time. They were out going to work. They were out in association. They were attending offending behaviour programs. I think now when you go onto a prison wing, the noise is often coming from behind closed doors because you've got prisoners fastened into places where frankly you would hesitate to house livestock for 23 and a half hours a day sometimes because there is a shortage of staff. You've got regimes that have completely collapsed because of the unavailability of people to run workshops, or an insufficient number of staff to supervise education, and all of those facilities that actually act as a pressure valve that all too often now is building. And what happens when that pressure builds and builds, when you've people behind their doors and they've got no consistency in their lives, they've no control over their lives, they've got lots of personal issues that staff should be helping them with. So when those doors are unlocked, what you're seeing, frankly, is an increase in violence.
When you're talking about the level of violence that we're seeing in our prisons, what sort of incidents are we talking about?
Well, incidents like people being attacked with improvised weapons, because it's quite easy still, because the prison service hasn't got round to banning single-use razors yet, despite years of dithering over it, and alternatives existing. It's very easy to take the blades out of a single-use razor and melt them into the shaft vertically, and you have a potentially lethal weapon that can give you life-changing injuries. Boiling water that is laced with sugar that's thrown over somebody, has the same kind of impact as napalm in terms of how it works. The very, very hot liquid sticks to your face, causes scalding and burns and so on. And you've got all sorts of weapons that are available to people who are in prisons. And, if you don't have any outlet for purposeful activity, if you have people that are continually locked behind their doors in a very unpredictable way, then you have a recipe for violence.
To what extent, then, does this booming economy in drugs, and we've got to call it an economy now, surely, given the amounts of money and the sophistication that's going on, to what extent is that the fuel for the violence that we see in prison? Or is that something that prison governors are happy to see continue? Because, as you say, we've got people in their cells 22, 23, 24 hours a day with nothing else to do, frankly.
So the infiltration of drugs into prisons has, I think, become worse because of the availability of drones, for example, that can deliver to a cell window that still haven't been defeated. But also because of the type of drugs that are being taken. So, we've moved on from, cannabis or perhaps heroin and sometimes cocaine into a completely new generation of novel psychoactive substances, artificially created substances that give you a high, but also are extremely addictive and change your personality, sometimes to becoming very, very violent. And, you can generate an enormous markup because you've got that captive, desperate market that has resulted in, for example, the corruption of prison staff. And I don't simply...
Yeah, but that's exactly it. That's exactly my point. I mean, I get the demand. I understand the massive demand that there is amongst the prison population for access to narcotics. What I have never been able to understand is how on earth, in a prison environment where we can stop the prisoners from getting out, for goodness sakes, although, as HMP Wandsworth showed, not 100% of the time, but if we can stop prisoners getting out, I've never been able to understand why we can't stop or at least significantly reduce the amount of illegal drugs that are floating around our prison system.
The screening tools that are used are actually quite sophisticated now. They're like the airport screening tools, but they're not used on prison staff. Or prison staff, by the way, isn't simply frontline officers who are actually put at risk by corrupt colleagues, but it also includes all the other people that come into prison: teachers, psychologists, nurses, workmen, all sorts of people. So those people are not scanned in the same way as prisoners are scanned. Therefore, that is a vector. Drones are a vector. Also, throwovers, literally people walking around the perimeter and throwing drugs over the perimeter fence, are also a vector. And prisoners become very sophisticated and adept at creating diversions that will push staff in one direction in order to be able to rescue these packages. Drones are now so ubiquitous and cheap, and there's no real effort to stop them, that there could be if there was investment, that they're able to deliver on order to prisoners' windows. You've only got to look on, there's multiple YouTube channels which prisoners are filming humiliating scenes inside prisons and gangster type activity. And we're paying north of 8 billion a year for people to do this, but the phones, to make the point, are important because they have apps on them that can arrange the instant transfer of money. So it's a very slick operating model that is certainly dominated by organised crime in many of the prisons, and will be very hard to shift because it's so lucrative.
So with this new Labour government in place, they have clearly, we've known about the problems with drugs and we've known about the problems with violence in our prison service for quite some time. Their immediate focus has, however, been on overcrowding. Was that the correct approach?
That was the worst thing to do apart from all the alternatives. There is no way around this. They were given a hospital pass by the previous administration, who had completely and incompetently failed to keep pace with a building strategy to keep people securely and safely in custody who were sent by the courts. Part of that, I guess, is due to, and we're talking about back to the Blair era here, an increasing amount of punitive activity and laws created that are going to put more people in prison for longer. We need an honest conversation about whether that's the right way to go, or whether there should be and could be community alternatives.
What is your view, Ian? Because listening to our serving prison governor, the one thing that they identified was that we perhaps need to go back to the drawing board and work out exactly what prison is for. I mean, the types of people that we should be sending to people he believes should be, serious organised crime, crimes of violence, crimes of sexual offending and so on. For other people, we should be investigating other opportunities, other alternatives. Where are you?
There is a kind of mythology here that says that, magistrates and judges send people to prison immediately. Often people have been, 50, 60 times in front of a judge or a magistrate. Often these people are causing, dramatic amounts of harm to communities, particularly people, for example, who commit non-violent acquisitive crime to feed a drug habit. Those are the sorts of people who are closing down little corner shops in communities that could ill afford to lose them, and they are sapping the morale and making these places people want to leave. They cause an enormous amount of harm. But actually, what we should be doing with those people who are part of the problem of an overloaded custodial system is finding a way to treat them, perhaps securely, but via the NHS, which will tackle their drug addiction, which probably should be a medical problem rather than a criminal justice problem.
Ian, thank you. I think we'll take a quick breather at that point. Problems, we have identified plenty, but what about the solutions? We'll be back in a second. Welcome back to the Sky News Daily. We are continuing to talk prisons with former Governor Ian Acheson. Ian, look, just given the scale of the problems that we're seeing inside our prisons, particularly when it comes to overcrowding, don't we need rather bigger solutions? I mean, sentencing guidelines perhaps might be an area to explore, given that recently we have seen an example. A man convicted of possession of child abuse imagery not receiving a custodial sentence. Some of those who got caught up in the riots, for example, making offensive remarks online, ending up spending more than a year behind bars.
But I think, yes, we need a fundamental conversation, an uncomfortable conversation about what we can afford as a country in terms of running a criminal justice system, and then who we send there. But we have to take the public with us. Now, you've seen the scenes, and I've seen the scenes of prisoners cavorting around outside Wandsworth Prison where I used to work as the head of security there back in the day, shooting bottles of champagne all over the place because they've been released early. And that's an affront to victims. And people will be baffled as to why, there was incompetence within the Ministry of Justice to not make, leaving the prison respectfully and quietly a condition of release. So, there's quite a lot that's wrong with the system that needs to be fixed. But fundamentally, if you want a criminal justice system that protects the public and deals with the dangerousness people represent, to reduce that dangerousness and fit them for useful lives after custody, we've either got to get many more prisons and staff to work in them, or we've got to reduce the population.
Fundamentally, though, where is the accountability for what has gone wrong within the prison service?
All of the narrative that I've seen is saying, it's overcrowding that's causing all the problems. That is fundamentally untrue. What you've got to look at is a culture of an organisation that has presided over failures that are failures of management and leadership. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I think if you're in a place where you can't even get the bins emptied, what else is going wrong? So we've got some problems of leadership that we need to solve. And we've got a cultural problem here, because the prison service in the past, in terms of its leadership, which is very insular and very defensive when it comes to any external criticism, and you never get, unlike any public service organisation that I know of, you never get any of the senior leadership appearing in the media and programmes like this and explaining, what's gone wrong and what they're going to do to try to fix the problem. If Shabana Mahmood wants to create a prison service that we can be proud of, that is effective, that people will want to join, that as a law enforcement agency has an esprit de corps, rather than sometimes feeling like, to paraphrase it, the paramilitary arm of the Quakers, we need to get serious about restoring discipline within the organisation, because people aren't working effectively. We're not recruiting and training the right people with the right sort of resilience and emotional intelligence to do what is, as I've said before, a really critical job for society. I've done a whole pile of things in my life, but being a frontline prison officer is probably the job I'm most proud of. And it hurts me deeply to see the dereliction of the organisation culturally in terms of its competence between when I was walking in the landings and today.
Ian Acheson, good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us. Well, responding to the points raised by that anonymous prison governor, a Ministry of Justice spokesperson said this: "This government inherited a prison system in crisis, putting pressure on the entire justice system and ultimately the public at risk. We are taking the difficult but necessary action to make sure we can keep locking up dangerous criminals and keep people safe. We thank all our staff for their hard work, and we will continue to drive improvements in our prisons to help more offenders turn their back on crime." Coming up tomorrow, we hand over the reins of the Daily Podcast to our team in the United States. They'll be bringing you the latest on the presidential election. But that is your lot for this edition of the Daily. We'll see you again soon.